Hello everyone. Tonight we relax with the story of Vikings, the nightmare of Europe and the disappearance without a trace. Let's get started. You open your eyes and find yourself standing on a foggy shore, listening quietly to the sound of waves crashing against rocks, the pungent smell of sea salt permeating your breath. In the distance, the silhouettes of longships appear on the water, their bows carved into the shape of dragon heads, their tongues licking the cold waves as if they were born from the sea god's nightmares. Welcome to 793 AD. Now, if you're living at Lindisfarne Abbey in northeast England, good luck, because you might not survive breakfast. The Vikings came, and they didn't bring bread. They came thundering down, long hair, eyes of ice, axes sharp enough to cut a gaze in two. You saw monks in brown robes running, church bells falling to the ground, gold and silver looted, and Bibles stained with blood. Monasteries, considered sacred and inviolable, became a feast for the Norse pirates. Of course, that's just the beginning. From there, Europe went into a fever. You walked through empty villages, save for the chirping of birds and the smell of smoldering smoke. From England to Ireland, from the Rhine to the French coast, the name Viking sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest soldiers. The funny thing, they didn't call themselves Vikings. It was a term for going Viking. That is, going plundering for fun. You know, like a summer vacation of fire and tears. The first official record of the attack on Lindisfarne was the death knell for the old era. The subsequent wave of attacks forced kingdoms to change their defenses. Fortresses were built like mushrooms after a rain. But you know what else grew? Fear. It grew in the heart of every king. Here's a weird fact you might like. Vikings were actually pretty clean. They bathed weekly, a rare practice in flea-ridden medieval Europe. Many English ladies volunteered after them, not just out of fear, but out of fascination. That's right, you're thinking pine and testosterone. But back to the blood and axes. You sit around the fire with the villagers, hearing about their long, serpent-like ships that could sail upstream without the wind. Historians still debate whether the Vikings were organized by real strategy, or were simply scattered bands of raiders with a shared penchant for destruction. Either way, you get the sense. They moved fast, struck unexpectedly, and didn't adhere to any of the moral codes of warfare of the time. Here's a light-hearted joke to keep you breathing while you snuggle up. One English king once sent a letter to another king asking for help, writing that the Northmen bring not only axes, but also digestive disorders. Maybe he just used fermented herring. You tiptoe into an abandoned church. The walls are covered in axe marks. A rat-eaten wafer remains on the altar. Outside, what shoe prints lead to the sea. And you realize the nightmare has only just begun. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the videos and subscribe. But only if you actually like what I do here. And tell me where you're listening. What city? What time is it? Now turn off the lights. Let's relax together with tonight's journey. You flinch at the sound of oars splashing water, and the whispers of words in a language you've never heard. The first scream of the night is heard, and you know it. The cold north wind has officially arrived. You are sitting in a longboat, narrow-bodied, shallow-bottomed, oars beating steadily on inky water. No sails fill the night wind, just soft breathing and eyes as sharp as knives looking out at the horizon. You are cold, not just because of the sea breeze, but because you know you are with Vikings on their way to where someone will cry. After Britain, it was the turn of the rest of Europe to tremble. You dock at a coastal French fishing village. The crowing of roosters is interrupted by screams. No army arrives in time. A typical Viking raid lasts less than a few hours, but its effects reverberate for centuries. Even Charlemagne, ruler of the vast Carolingian Empire, paled at the mention of longships. One memorable historical event, in 845, a Viking leader named Ragnar Lothbrok, real, mythical, or both, sailed across the Seine, heading straight for Paris. King Charles the Bald had to pay a huge ransom in silver to make him turn away. No fight, no loss. Just medieval pirate economics. You stand in the narrow streets of old Paris, where wealthy residents once thought they were protected by rivers and stone walls. Unexpectedly, the enemy comes not from the city gates, but from the water, something you can't lock. You know what's weird? The Vikings made it all the way to North Africa. Yes, that's right. They crossed the Mediterranean, raiding scorched lands that never got a drop of cold rain back home. Maybe they brought sunscreen that smelled like fish oil. Who knows? And you sit with them on the beach, listening to stories about their raids on Genoa, Pisa, Seville, cities that once considered themselves the center of the Christian world, now burned to the ground by a few dozen shirtless men with braids and crazy laughter. There's an academic debate that you might find interesting. Historians still disagree about whether the Vikings had a clear social hierarchy when it came to raiding. Did the strongest oarsmen get the lion's share? Or did they have a fair pirate alliance for dividing up the spoils? Some records suggest they even had accountants. Imagine this. A Viking sitting on parchment writing down 3 buckets of gold for Bjorn, 5 for Eric, a kiss from the priestess for Thorvald. Kidding, but only half. Once you leave France, the journey isn't over. You cross the sea all the way down to the coast of Italy. Some sources describe small raids on Naples, and even Viking traders showing up in Constantinople, which the Byzantines called Varangian, the emperor's trusted mercenary. You walk down the marble streets and see Western knights looking like children playing pretend war compared to the tenacity and skill of the Nordic warriors. Here's a gentle joke for you. There's a medieval letter that records a bishop complaining that the Vikings not only stole gold and silver, but also curtains. Then he sighed. They're barbarians who would take curtains. Can you imagine Bjorn wearing a cloak made of red flower curtains? Here's the thing. Vikings didn't just strike. They liked to stop, settle, trade, marry local women. They left their mark everywhere, both in their genes and their vocabulary. You could live in a town called Normandy and not know that the name means land of the Northmen. You camp with them in the fields of Normandy. It's dark. You listen to the distant howling of wolves and the snoring of blond men after a barrel of mead. You huddle under your duvet, which probably smells a little fishy, and think, how could a group of people from cold islands be so haunting? You wake at dawn. The sun is still out, and there's only a gray haze over the ash-streaked fields. There are no more screams of marauding or the clanging of axes and shields, just the smell of smoke and horse manure and silence. You are no longer in France or Italy. You have been pulled back north, back to the homeland of the Vikings. Here you realize one thing. In order to create nightmares for all of Europe, the Vikings also had to endure a nightmare of their own. Scandinavia, where winters are so long you can bury a secret in frozen ground and dig it up in spring, and it will still be intact. The settlements are scattered, the climate is harsh, the resources are scarce. You can see why people like to leave, but not everyone leaves. Those who stay have had to fight not just the cold, but each other. The titular event in this section, the Battle of Hafrsfjord around 872, where a young king named Harald Fairhair, nice hair, no joke, defeated local lords to unite much of Norway. You're standing on the shores of that fjord, watching thousands of shields clash, blood splatter on the ice, and you know, the Vikings weren't just raiders. They were victims of their own greed and internal strife. Is there anything strange? Despite their violence, the Vikings were fond of poetry. Their long sagas told tales of love, revenge, and gods both wise and foolish. Have you ever seen a red-haired warrior standing on a pile of skulls reciting love poems? It's like Shakespeare in form of a Viking wrestler. You continue your journey and enter a small abandoned village. The wooden houses are collapsed by frost. The stables are empty. The windmills are squeaking, and no one is tying them up. The reason? Hunger. You spend a long winter with the people. They eat all the food, then the dogs, then the poisonous herbs, because they can't tell the difference from wild ones. Suddenly, raiding the French sounds more reasonable. An academic debate continues. It is unclear whether the outbound raids were a national strategy, or simply the spontaneous actions of unemployed groups and boats. Some scholars attribute the expansion to a population explosion, others to political expulsions. Go out to sea, Eric. If you stay here, I will cut your beard in your sleep. You hear a mother talking by the fire. Her son went on a Viking trip last year. No letters, no news. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he got married in England and changed his name to George. You see, Viking life is not all about axes and blood. It is a series of bitter choices between the cold of home and the flames of war far away. You look into the eyes of the old survivors. Each has lost a son, a husband, a friend. You realize they don't want to kill anyone. They just want to live. A light joke for now. A Viking poet was once awarded a bull for writing a poem praising a chieftain. But then he wrote a poem criticizing it and was thrown into the river. From then on, the Vikings had a saying. It's good to write poems, but don't write two about the same person. You pass by stone tombs. Runes inscribed on them record your exploits, and the words, "Forget me not." In the silence of this cold land, you hear the whispers of the past. We were the ones who made the world tremble, but what was the price of glory? And you don't answer. You just pull the covers up, curl up, and let the north wind tell the rest of the story. You leave the frozen lands, shake the snow off your furs, and head back south. Not to plunder again, but to witness something else. The transformation of the Vikings. You are standing at the gates of York, England. But the city is no longer under attack. It has belonged Vikings. They called it Jorvik. Every street, market, even public toilet bears their mark. You pass a stall selling beaver pelts, then stop at a tavern where a big guy mixes mead with coriander. A controversial choice. Yes, the Vikings didn't just raid, they also built. The towns they conquered gradually became trading centers, where the raiders' children became accountants. The official event of this section, in 911, a Viking leader named Rollo was given a large tract of land by the King of France, the area that would become Normandy. The conditions? Rollo had to convert to Christianity and defend France from other Viking raids, which is to say, I'll give you the land, so you can fight off people like you. Sounds like hiring a hacker to kill a hacker. You stand on the banks of the Seine and see Rollo, a man so big that his horse can't carry him, bowing down for baptism, his axe still in one hand. A strange mix, god and warrior, church and dried blood on armor. See what's interesting? While the Vikings were once feared, their descendants, the Normans, later conquered England in 1066, defeating the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings. It's as if Europe forgot. They'd invited the devil into their home. And see how they adapted? Viking kings started wearing Byzantine silk robes, using money instead of plunder, building schools, writing laws. They were no longer the terror of Europe. They were become Europe. An ongoing scholarly debate remains. As the Vikings settled and assimilated, did the Viking identity truly disappear? Or did it just change shape? Some historians say the Vikings died peacefully. Others believe their spirit lives on in European military culture, that no one actually killed the Vikings. They just wore shirts instead of armor. You're sitting in a small stone church in Dublin, once the largest Viking colony outside Scandinavia. The priest is reading the Bible, and you smell dried fish and fermented bran. 10th century lunch fare, and not very tasty. And a curious fact? Hundreds of bone combs have been found underground in Dublin. Vikings were obsessed with grooming. They kept their hair short, their beards elaborately braided, and were criticized by European clergy for being too clean. Yes, you heard right. The raiders were in the habit of bathing weekly, while the locals did not. You think of a light joke. If a Viking were to go on a job interview today, His resume might list multidisciplinary experience, maritime, diplomacy, trade, construction, poetry, and petty theft. You pass a two-story wooden house in the town of Hedeby, once the busiest trading port in northern Europe. Amid the cries of vendors selling fabrics, swords, and spices from the east, you see a Viking child learning to write runes on a small wooden stick. Maybe he will never raid anyone. Maybe he will become a judge. You stop. Everything is quiet. The men who once terrorized you are now melted into the earth. Their names changed, Latinized. The boys named Olaf are now Louis. The girls named Fridas are now Marie. You realize they don't disappear. They melt, like ice in a cup of hot mead. A final breath from the past blows through you, like the soft thud of an axe hitting the ground. No one shouts Valhalla anymore. The warrior's dream is over. You stand on the prow of the last Viking ship, but this time, it's not drifting in the Atlantic. It's in a museum under soft yellow lights and soft, whispering footsteps. The wood is rotten, the ropes are memories, and the rusted swords lie untouched in glass cases. But something in you and all of us still stirs when we see that carved dragon head. An ancient instinct, a restless curiosity. This is when it becomes clearer than ever. The Vikings didn't disappear. They just stopped being called Vikings. The official event in this section. Around the 11th century, the full Christianization of Scandinavia was complete. The last king, believed to still practice pagan rituals, Lotswain, was murdered for refusing to abandon the worship of Odin. Blood sacrifices were abolished, replaced by baptisms. Can you imagine how it must have felt to be an old priest, holding a sacrificial knife, and then told to change careers to become a priest? Shocking. You're in Uppsala, once a Viking religious center. Back in the day, you could see dozens of horse carcasses hanging from sacred trees, blood flowing around temples. Now, a stone church and a souvenir shop selling Odin dolls, childlike versions. Cute in a weird way. Weird fact. Although the Vikings were considered heathen barbarians by Christian nations, many European nobles loved Norse culture. Some wore fur coats, learned to wield axes, and even named their children Bjorn or Astrid. The late Viking era was like stopping listening to rock and switching to jazz, but still keeping your leather jacket. You pass a small river in Gotland where thousands of silver coins were once found buried in the ground, treasure that warriors never returned to claim. You bend down, scoop up some mud, and imagine, who buried it? A man named Skallagrim, running from the royal guards? A girl hiding her dowry before sailing to marry a French prince? No one knows. History is a one-sided conversation, an ongoing academic debate. When did the Viking Age end? Some cite 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, when the English king Harold defeated the last Viking, Harald Hardrada. Others say the Viking Age never ended. History just stopped paying attention to them. You sit down on a rock, feeling the north wind blow through your hair. No more traveling, no more Valhalla. You feel lost in the gap between two eras, where Vikings have become textbooks. A little boy walks into a museum. He looks at the wooden ship and asks his father, "Who are they?" And the father replies, "They traveled the world, carrying axes, hopes, and fears." You smile. The answer is not wrong, but it is not enough. You leave the museum and step out into the pale afternoon light. The clouds drift slowly, like rudderless ships. You suddenly realize what made the Vikings legendary wasn't the axes, the shields, or the blood. It was the will to stay still. They didn't seek domination, they saw it exist. One last joke for tonight. The Vikings may have conquered half of Europe, but they never invented a chair with a back. They sat on chests, on stones, on each other's laps. Probably because they never thought they'd sit still long enough to need anything that comfortable. You feel your eyelids growing heavy. In the soft wind, you hear a lullaby from the far north, a song of an era gone, but not gone. Now you can sleep peacefully. Tonight, you have traveled with me on a dreamy journey, from the dark waves of the North Atlantic to the smoky banks of the Seine, and back to the cold, snowy land where it all began. The Vikings. You have heard of them as fierce raiders, but now you know. They were people like you and me, caught between poverty, ambition, and extreme weather. You saw them sail all the way to Baghdad, build cities in England, and create empires in Normandy. You heard poetry on the battlefield and saw young men with braided hair like 10th century movie stars. And you witnessed the final transformation, when swords rusted, axes broke, and Vikings became nobles, monks, and merchants. History doesn't always end neatly. Sometimes it just quietly changes its name, its voice, its dress. The Vikings didn't disappear. They melted into the worlds they once rocked. They live on in our maps, in our blood, and in our imaginations. Thank you for following along until the end of today's story. Now turn off the lights and go to sleep. Good night, everyone.